There was a boy named Noam Apter. About, I don't know, a month and a half ago. There's a yeshiva, Jewish Institute of Higher Study, in a place called Otniel, in the mountains south of Jerusalem. And they were having Shabbat for families, like the students. And they had about 100 people, and they were all in the dining room, and they're singing the Shalom Aleichem, the welcome song of peace. It's interesting that we start our Friday night meal speaking about Shalom, about peace. That's the first goal, that we should all learn to be together. And while they're singing the Shalom Aleichem, and the beautiful sounds are wafting over the hills, there's another sound. It's the sound of wire cutters cutting through the fence of this town. And as they stand up to say the Kiddush, so two terrorists disguised as IDF soldiers are making their way in. And a little later in the meal, 4 boys are in the kitchen, and they're preparing the next course to bring in. One of them is Noam Apter, 20 years old. And these 2 soldiers burst into the kitchen, kick open the door. You have to understand, if you're an Israeli, you're a yeshiva student, now you've done the army, and you see an Israeli soldier, that's too long a thought process to be able to imagine. It's like showing a 5-year-old Superman and telling him that he's the bad guy. You can't, it's hard to go there. Very clever. And they begin to spray the kitchen with machine gun fire. Noam Apter is hit in the stomach, and if I'm not mistaken, in the hip. He succeeds in crawling over to the door in between the kitchen and the dining room, locking it and throwing away the key. All 4 of the boys in that kitchen were killed. When the terrorists got to the door and they realized it was locked and they couldn't get through, they ended up going back outside of the kitchen, and when they were working their way around, thank God the Ready Alert Squad from the town found them and they were killed. So this boy's actions saved the lives probably of 100 people. I mean, they had grenades and and I've thought about this. I want you to know there is something about coming under fire, especially when it happens unexpectedly, that is the closest thing to pure terror that you can imagine in this world. And I want you to know that whenever a person experiences that, it's like when you watch the movies and you see this patrol going out at night and you think it's scary because it's night. It's actually not true. When you're out on a mission, night is very comforting because you feel invisible and you learn how to blend with the night. And the night is actually your friend. It's the enemy of the person in a position doing guard duty. And when something goes wrong and you trip a wire or they spot you and night turns into day, that is a traumatic experience that is so intense that the man doesn't exist that doesn't go through an instant of shock. You have to experience that trauma. They compare it in the army to the experience of a baby being born, going from the comfort of the womb to the shock of being in the outside world. And that's why a baby cries. You have to experience that. Everybody goes into shock for an instant. The measure of the man is how quickly you come out of it and what you do. To be confronted with a live fire situation is terrifying. To have it in such close quarters is unimaginable to me. To have it as a civilian, when you're unarmed, that's beyond pure terror. And I want you to know that for a boy who's 20 years old, to confront that, and by the way, with a stomach wound, which is the most painful wound in a combat situation, I watched a man die from stomach wounds. It's a terrible, terrible thing. That a person succeeds in crawling over to a door and doing that is beyond my comprehension. I want you to know that on a physical level, it's not possible. Can't be. How could a person do that? I have no idea. I don't know where a person finds the strength to do that. How do you jump over a pit like that? So there's an idea that a real test, a real challenge, a real struggle is actually impossible. And if I confront that which is impossible, and I nonetheless succeed, I actually am bearing testimony to the fact that in this world I am not alone. It's like God comes to Abraham and he says to Abraham, listen, I want you to offer up your son, your only son, your beloved Isaac. And Abraham, if he would have consulted me for his script, should have said to God, that is not possible. You promised me, you made me a covenant that Kivi Yitzchaki Karei L'Chazera, through this son you will have children and children's children and a nation will be born. It's not possible that you could promise me that from this son we will inherit this land, and yet you're telling me to kill him. And God at that point should have said to him, you're absolutely right, it's not possible, now go do it. God comes to the Jewish people, he says, listen, You've just survived the most horrific experience in modern history. You have no guns, you have no weapons, you have no army to speak of, you have no armor, you have no air force, you have nothing, no artillery. You're surrounded by 7 armies, supported by 22 countries. You're outnumbered at best 15-1. The pundits in the world are taking bets on how many hours you will last. I want you to build a state. It's not possible. It's not possible. God says you're right. Not possible. But that's what I want you to do. Build the state of Israel. So they do it. I have a friend who taught military strategy in the American Army. He was at West Point. Did you know that at West Point, they do an exercise, and they give the men a problem, which is essentially the battle plan of the birth of the state of Israel. And they show them the ratio. There are 7 armies, this is the numbers, you have no artillery, you have no tanks, you have no planes. And they ask them if there's a way to win this war. And the graduates inevitably come back and say, no, this is an unwinnable situation. Retreat is the only answer. They say, no, there's a way to do this. And they go back to the drawing board, and they can't come up with a solution. And at the end, they tell them, you're absolutely right, this is impossible. By the way, this is how the state of Israel was born. In West Point. Not possible. And when something like that happens, if I'm willing to listen, and again, just so we're clear, again, I don't claim this is an answer. I'm here sharing. I'm sharing with you how I get through my days. But what you do with this is up to you. But if you hear or you see that kind of a jump, and you listen, you wonder, maybe that actually bears testimony to the fact that it couldn't be that we're alone. Now that's what the word nisayon, which is the Hebrew word for test, means. The root is nes, the miraculous. And essentially what I have to do when I have these challenges, I have to accept that it's impossible. I have to be willing to attach myself to some greater power, but most of all, I have to be willing to leap.